Strategy, technology, demos, and stories from Adobe Consulting. This is the Experience Lab Podcast. And welcome to today's episode of the Experience Lab Podcast. I'm Chris from Adobe as always. And today I'm going to spend as little time introducing this as I can because I'd just love for you to get to it. I'm going to be chatting with Ivan Mironchuk, and Ivan is a member of the product team for Journey Optimizer. He and I actually did our summit session together this year on tips and tricks for AJO, and it was wild and crazy, and we had a lot of fun. Ivan is going to talk to us about use cases, specifically how to craft a use case. And I will leave you with a phrase from him, and then we'll get right into it, which is everything that I needed to know about how to build a use case, I learned in first grade English. All right, I am here with Ivan on the podcast. Ivan, do you want to introduce yourself? Say hi, tell us what you do for a living.
Sure. Ivan here, and I'm a product manager on Adobe Journey Optimizer. Happy to be here.
So you and I are going to talk about use cases, and we've worked together on a bunch of different things.
Yeah.
And I know this is something we get into a lot. So we're going to do it live for the world. Talk to me a little bit about the challenges that I guess you see from your perspective of customers trying to build and activate use cases.
Sure. I mean, I think what we see a lot of times is people get into the weeds pretty quickly on doing kind of setup. They instantly want to get hands-on keyboard and start building journeys and kind of plotting things out. And we see that a lot of times you need to take a step back and really start to define your goals and orient around who you're trying to activate and why it is that you're trying to engage with them.
As opposed to just, I bought these features, I want to use these features because I bought them.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Let's start from something real. So you and I were talking about this idea of, I'm going to quote you now. The way you put it to me the other day was, everything I need to learn about how to build a use case, I learned in first grade English.
Yeah, exactly.
Can you explain what that means?
Yeah, you take when we think about learning, how to learn how to read and construct a sentence, you're thinking about the who, the what, the where, the when, and the why.
Yeah. So why don't we try to put this in the context of a real use case?
Mm-hmm.
So we worked on actually several sports customers where they've got clubs who have fans in attendance. And there's a use case that we've done. In fact, let's not tip what the use case is, but let's say that the goal is to try to drive seat upgrades once they get into the park. So we're trying to drive more seat revenue than we potentially would have. So why don't you take us through sort of the 5 W's of how we put that together?
Well, so right there, you just define the why, right? So your why or your goal is to get more seat upgrades. And so if you're thinking that is your goal, then the very first thing that you're trying to determine is the who, right? So you have the why, who is it that could potentially lead to that why. So if it's seat upgrades, who is potentially going to be the ones that can get the seat upgrades? So right there, you're trying to define the audience. And in this case, it might be people that are attending that actual game. So you have the what, which is people that are going to attend the game. The when is probably either the day of the game or potentially a few days before. So you have different time spans potentially, and those could potentially be different engagements. So you could offer a seat upgrade, when they book the ticket. You could offer a seat upgrade, a couple days out, depending upon the time, the compressed timeline there. You could offer a seat upgrade right in the moment when they've entered the stadium or the arena. So there's a couple different factors there, right? And then there is the what or the how, in terms of what is the message you're going to send, what is the offer you're going to send, what is the channel you're going to send on, what is the most appropriate or efficient way to kind of get that goal or get that conversion.
Well, and part of the when is stepping through the actual customer experience of arriving and walking up to the
Right.
game. And how do I know that you're actually there? And I think that was the thing that tipped us off to what this use case should be based on, which was the ticket scan.
Yes.
Is the moment you scan your ticket, I know you're there. And then the who part can also be broken down a little bit more, and we can get into, analytics being important as well. But who's likely to actually do the upgrade? I only
Yeah.
have so many to give away. So is it somebody who's got a lower tier ticket that has upgraded before, so I know that they're likely to do it again? So I should start with those first and work my way down through the list.
Right. That's really a big challenge, or, kind of the crux of being able to define a good engagement is understanding what is your highest propensity audience of trying to get those conversions, right? It doesn't do any good to try and connect with somebody that has no chance of converting.
That's true. And feature plug within
Yes.
platform, there is a tool called Customer AI,
Exactly.
which we have used to drive this use case of who has the highest propensity to upgrade their seat. And then
Right.
that's who we can set it to.
Yeah, and that's great because it can look at not only the attributes of that user, right? You can know, are they a season ticket holder? Are they, how many games have they attended in the past? So you have, some of those things that are very concrete, but then you have also kind of different engagement metrics or scores or previous things that they've done. So behavioral events that we can kind of accumulate and traverse through and then define that score, right? So that does give you a higher kind of likely chance of converting when putting all that together.
Yeah. And so from a use case perspective, we built a couple versions of this. There's the pre-game version, and then there's the really cool one that's always fun to talk about, which is the ticket scan day of. Do you want to walk us through how that works or what that looks like?
Sure. I mean, there's definitely some different facets with that, right? Whether it's knowing that you have to kind of define what the event is to know that the user is there and they're active and they're kind of engaged in the moment. So you have the ticket scan as a way. You can look at geofence entries as another way. So you have different kind of ways of determining, is the user, kind of primed and pumped for this particular engagement, this activation. And then you have a bunch of different kind of ways that you would potentially segment them out to determine, what is the most likely channel that they're going to engage on. So obviously you're looking at, are they opted into push or SMS or email? And those are the kind of the primary channels that you would want to engage with them on at that time. And determining, kind of which one is going to be the best targeted hit to make an offer to increase, likelihood of conversion.
And what's interesting as we start building on top of these that we've learned is that the event doesn't necessarily have to be a customer initiated event either.
Right.
We've done one since where, especially in sports, something happens in the game itself, and then we've got a series of fans in attendance that we want to target. Maybe it's everybody in a certain section that relates to what just happened in the game, or everybody rooting for a certain team. And we want to send them a message based on what happened in the game. So in Journey language, it's called a business event.
Yes.
And then we have an audience of people that qualify that we can send a message and do all of that in seconds.
Yeah, and that's interesting because that kind of orients a use case around something slightly different, right? So you can have goal-oriented use cases where my end goal is I want to get, seat upgrades or conversions. You have audience-based use cases where it's like I just know that I want to engage with this particular audience, so I'm going to start with an audience. But in the example that you just described, that's more of a time-based use case or a trigger-based use case. And you're saying when this happens, that is the precipice of the start of that particular journey, right? And then you're going to figure out, okay, this is something I can hook into, and what do I want to do from there?
Yeah, it changes your MO. right? You've got a
Right.
different goal in mind between sort of the customer initiated moments versus a brand initiated moment, as we always call it.
Exactly. It's very different, right? If it's like if I've added something to my cart or I favorited a product or something of that nature, that's my user initiated behavior, right? And that's an even stronger signal, right? Because then it's you're engaging with them based upon an action that they've taken, right? Whereas a brand initiated moment is kind of what you described as like it's the brand communicating to the customer on terms that they think are going to be relevant.
Yeah. And so if I take this outside of sporting, which is very event driven, it's very in the moment, and you look at something like the web, I had a customer last year that was really struggling to figure out how do we craft a use case for the web. And in their case, I took a slightly different approach. I think you could still break it out into the 5 Ws, which was to draw a map of all the checkpoints a customer has to go through. They're going to see an advertisement, they're going to click, they're going to land on the homepage. Then what's your next mission? It's to get them to sign in or register or subscribe or attend a webinar or do some sort of thing. And then there's this weird line that you can kind of draw down the middle of the page between unknown customer and known customer.
Yeah.
And once you get them over to known, now you're trying to build out a profile and all this rich information so that you can drive loyalty and drive them around. And it's kind of a decision of pick one. Pick something along that journey and build a who, what, where, when, why around that moment. And then you can build a series of those, and you've got a whole handful of really great use cases that pushes your audience through based on where they are in their journey.
Yeah. And that really, I think what's really interesting in the point that you just brought up there is that known versus unknown. And that's where it gets into kind of like what level of personalization do you go for based upon whether or not the person is a registered logged in user or is not, right? And we can get into kind of levels of, creepiness potentially of like, hey, I'm not logged in. How do you know so much about me? How much personalization do you want to kind of showcase to a user before it becomes a little bit, creepy or unsettling, right? Obviously, we know different, behaviors and things based upon identifiers that are collected, and those are, where you want to potentially offer recommendations and things like that. But, it's always, when you see somebody's being kind of followed around the web and they see, they searched for a particular product and now they're seeing ads everywhere for, products in that same class. It's always kind of, you get that little cringy feeling, right? So there's definitely, you have to be really kind of thoughtful in the levels of personalization that you're using in the kind of known versus unknown universe there.
So what you're saying is I shouldn't go, hey, welcome to the homepage. By the way, real quick, you left your garage door open this morning when you left for work.
Exactly.
Well, and when you start getting into the who, this is where it kind of gets interesting because you start creating use case variants based on different who's. You're going to have a different treatment or a different experience that you'll give known because you can versus the unknown. Perhaps it's more generic in nature because you don't know anything yet.
Yeah, and that's where exactly. So you're creating variants there, right? And you definitely want to design for those particular fallbacks so that they're not left with, a too generic experience. You want to be able to at least know certain things about, the individual, like what region they're in, what language what language preference they have, and to some degree, those are definitely use cases you need to account for.
Yeah, and I chat about this on a previous podcast that's now live, talking about B2B and account-based marketing. And that introduces an extra level of the who variant, which is the company information. So I may be the technical person, but we're at sales stage 2, not 5. And so you may treat me differently based on a B2B use case.
Yeah. Let me ask you this, Chris. So when you are at different customers, how do you feel like, have you seen over the past few years, different customers and organizations reorienting their staff or their teams to kind of better account for this? I think what we've seen in the past is like, there's definitely like silos around the organization. You have, marketing comms teams that are, kind of email focused. And then you have the web team, and then mobile comes in, and how does that work? And sometimes they're very siloed, and sometimes they're more cross integrated. And now that we're in this kind of omni-channel orchestration world, have you seen many customers kind of set up to kind of work that way?
I've seen it. I haven't seen enough of it, but I have seen it. One of the things that happens is when you bring the technology together, you force the people to come together. And sometimes clients see that and they make a change, and they'll go through a change management exercise to change the way their people work so that it's kind of built around the tools and the process that they're now using. A couple of our customers, well, one that you and I worked on, which is our grocery customer, they did a really good job of this. And it shocks me to this day that they blow away some of the biggest companies in the world, and they've got like 6 to 8 people that are doing this.
Yeah.
And they've just optimized the heck out of it around how the process actually works. They get a campaign out the door in no time at all. It's incredible. Whereas I've seen a lot of bigger organizations struggle because they keep the silos in place, and then you end up with a bit of a fight over who uses what tool, who owns what part of the process, and everyone's kind of fencing in what it is that they own, and that's when they struggle.
Yeah. Yeah, I was recently at a customer, and it was a fascinating presentation that one of their kind of CMOs had given, and she had been talking about really kind of looking at all of their engagements across this kind of who, what, where, when, and why. And she said, we're starting to break down silos and teams and create little squads that are focused on, in this particular use case, pre-trip, in-trip, and post-trip. And I thought that was really very interesting from kind of a way to break down some of those barriers and not think about, well, this is the web team and they were just creating little squads around optimizing experiences across that particular customer lifecycle. And I thought that was really, really great to see. Super interesting the way they kind of set that up.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest drivers of this too is content. Because especially as companies try to get consistency of their brand and the way they talk about things and show things and display things cohesively across all their channels, it's historically been content where it's the challenge of you've got an email team that's developing content, you've got a web team over here, you've got a paid media team over here, and you're struggling to do that maintaining scent concept where it smells the same no matter where I am.
Right.
And the whole content supply chain concept that Adobe's been going hard on is a step in the right direction, but teams have to organize around it too, to your point.
Yes. Yeah. And I'd love to see, like when we're thinking about building product, I'm thinking all the time about how to help the customer optimize against those goals, how to help them define their life cycles and then eventually build use cases against those life cycles. And you'll start to see that we're going to shape the product in that way to help really help you identify what are the key success metrics for those engagements, and then how do we start to bridge the gap with those in the product itself. Right now, it's choose your own adventure, right? And so I think we can get better at guiding people, and some of the agentic pieces and the agents coming out, I think will help a lot in those areas.
Yeah, we're going to go there now. The last thing I'll say just on the use case building and the process piece, if it's public, I believe it is, I'm going to link it down below. Andrew Church from Wegmans spoke at Summit about how their small team does this and how they run on Experience Platform and what their process looks like. It was really incredible. And so I'll link that down in the description below. Yeah. So agentic, the who, what, where, when, why, and agentic, what's the connection there and what's the so what between those two things?
I think I think it helps abstract. It helps the customer abstract, right? So if they are doing a good job of defining the who, what, where, when, and why, then it can sometimes be difficult to do the implementation against that. And rather than forcing you to get into the nitty-gritty of writing certain expressions and how do I define that audience and what is the time, the time constraints around different things, the agent should help you be able to put that all together, right? So it can take the abstract, language-oriented who, what, where, when, why, and then hopefully help you kind of build out those pieces, right? So you're giving, it's like putting together the puzzle, and you have the pieces, and the agent can help you put that puzzle together. So I think it should help accelerate adoption and get to those goals faster, so that you're not spending months trying to figure out, troubleshooting. I just can't quite get, this particular journey to work the way I want it to. So I think it should help. Maybe not get you 100% of the way there, but get you much closer.
Well, and we kind of have to get over the fact that it's first grade English and we feel silly and we want to feel like marketers who can define this in this super intelligent way.
Yeah.
But the simplicity of who, what, where, when, why also forces you to write a prompt.
Yes.
So if you're using, whether it's an agent that's full blown and connected to a bunch of tools or just a LLM chat to help you develop copy, feed it the who, what, where, when, why as your initial context. And if you go through that exercise, you'll give the LLM the information that it actually needs.
Right.
Because if you just say, build me an abandoned cart, it's going to do my pet peeve and it's going to write an email that says, hey, you forgot something.
Yes.
With no offer, nothing interesting or worth clicking on.
Right. Being as descriptive in there, and maybe even calling out, this is my audience. This is what I'm trying to achieve. These are the channels I'm looking to use. Like, I think all of that, being as descriptive as possible, it could be a whole paragraph. Sometimes I go into, because you get that little box, right, in all these prompt things. I'll start off with, potentially using a chat GPT or even going into Microsoft Word and using Copilot or something like that, and build out my full prompt there and really kind of look at it and study the what I'm going to paste in as the first prompt before I get into writing, because you can miss things if you're just trying to do it on the fly.
Yeah.
So thinking about it first.
And that first prompt is critical. If you write a very tiny little prompt for your first couple things, it's trying to stitch a conversation together, which
Right.
LLMs aren't great at yet. But if you give it one big chunk that has all the context and information that it needs, it'll keep referring back to it.
Yeah.
Especially if you do it early, it'll remember it and it will actually obsessively refer back to it.
Yes. Yep. The more inputs you can give it, the better your output's going to be, right?
Yeah, that's super powerful. Well, this has been great. I think we could probably go on for 2 more hours about use cases.
Totally.
This is really great. So really focus on the who, what, where, when, and why. The why being a really big one. And I'll just give another plug for talk to your analytics team, right? Look at the funnel of your checkout and see where people are jumping ship. And that gives you a why, and then build a use case around it. Do the 5 W's, give all that context to your agent, and off you go.
Exactly. Great
Cool.
chatting with you, Chris.
Yeah. Any parting words? Anything you want to say before we take off?
No, this has been great. Love having the conversation. I think it's always fun.
Awesome. Well, that was a great conversation. I think one of the key takeaways for me is not to look down my nose at the simplicity of that framework. The simplicity is actually what makes it work. And it's forcing you to answer the 5 very critical questions before you jump to the how. We often craft a use case based on the technology or based on the sizzle that we've been sold as we get into new tech. And what we really need to do is step back and look at the fundamentals of who are we trying to drive to do what? Why are we doing it? And then we can work our way into the how. And starting from the 5 W's gets us to a place of value so that we don't end up having built a use case that proved that the technology worked, but didn't actually drive value for us at the end. And so that simplicity is actually the reason why it works. But at the same time, it's sometimes a reason why companies will skip it, because we're all trying to feel like a smart marketer when just jumping back to the basics works really well. Really great conversation. I hope you enjoyed it. Like, subscribe, comment, all the things. And we will see you next time on the Experience Lab podcast. This has been the Adobe Experience Lab podcast.